Hey, folks, just let me know when we're ready to begin.
Sure, in a minute. Hey, Joshua. All right, all right.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Catalina. Hi,
Very nice to see
Joshua.
you. Hi.
Nice to see everyone. Um, yes, we are recording. I'll ask everyone for this section, please hide your camera just because it's affect the recording. And yeah, thank you. Okay, we can start. Welcome everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's great to see so many of you here for our first ever Responsible AI workshop, steering AI in the right direction. And I'm excited to kick things off. We have plenty the agenda is packed today, and it really speaks to how important this conversation is and how much interest there is in making AI more responsible. And we see a lot of registered participants today as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Hagag, and I've been here in the AI space for the past 12 years, both in academia and industry. And I'll be your host today. I lead research at the Re-AI Labs, where we focus on learning, building, and collaborating to make AI more responsible and impactful. And one of our main goals is to create spaces for meaningful discussions where we can share ideas, connect, and challenge perspectives. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. So we put up an incredible agenda and speakers, leading voices in AI and law and governance will help us to explore AI accountability, their risk and practical solutions. I hope we can engage in fascinating discussions today and after the workshop as well. We have a Discord channel as well as other conventional or more conventional social media, X and LinkedIn. You can find us there. We'll start with a keynote from Joshua Walker, then we'll go to AI accountability panel with great panelists, and we'll move into our industry track. And finally, we'll close with another keynote from Professor Arvind Naranayan. Before we start, I want to mention that we have both a chat and a Q&A section as part of the Zoom meeting room. We'll open up for 5 minutes Q&A at the end of each keynote session, and throughout the workshop, we'll try to answer relevant questions. Lots to cover, so let's get started. I see Joshua here. So Joshua, wait, yes. Hi, we are honored to welcome our very first speaker, Joshua Walker, is CEO of System.Legal. System.Legal aims to help 2 billion people by creating and developing advanced legal AI architectures and applications. Previously, Joshua co-founded and led Lex Machina and Codex, which you're probably familiar with. It is the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. In 2019, he published on Legal AI, one of the first fact-based attempts to map the territory between AI and the law. And he received JD from University of Chicago Law School. And before that, it was really interesting. He was the intelligence analyst for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Sorry. Walker has practiced also IP and data rights in Silicon Valley for 20 years. And we are so delighted and honored that you can join us today. Joshua will present system design for nation states, legal subsystems for institutional AI. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Joshua Walker. Joshua, the floor is yours.
I think you muted Joshua.
Yes. Again, that was the host, not me. So anyway, thank you guys. I see a lot of voices and people that I recognize. Anthony Noves, Bongia, Eric Deschamps, amongst many others. Eric is on this call. He's in Chicago often, and he started something called the Society for Legal Engineers, which is a concept after my own heart. We're going to talk a lot about that today and talk about why that's different than just engineering. But my point is simple. And so I'd encourage us we have a chance to have a sort of a discussion today with this group. Your questions are probably going to get addressed. So I'd love to, again, just as Ben had suggested, the idea of this is to start a conversation. And my point is simple, and it starts with a simple question, and that is, what is understanding? So what does that actually mean? And like a lot of concepts in computer science, it's ill-defined. It's very, very hard to define this concept. And it goes to the root of whether or not any of these systems are actually intelligent or not, whether they're humanish or not, and maybe we don't care. Right, but we at least care that it's simulating understanding in some ways because it's going to screw up otherwise. So, and then a lot of AI scientists though will say they'll define understanding to mean something where the system or where the model is able to, or the AI system is able to update its world model such that it can reflect, incorporate, and then reuse in different applications a map, its understanding or its coordinates or strengths of whatever it's trying to analyze. And if you step back for a second, AI is really at its root software that does analysis. That's all it is. Everything is called AI these days. And now, unlike a few years ago, everything pretty much is AI these days. AI is going to eat a lot of things, but it's basically software that does analysis at the end of the day. Now, what is a world model, right? That's a different question. Let me give you an example of something that happens with both humans and what I think computer scientists at Princeton and elsewhere have tried to do with LLMs. And that is when we walk around a city, they say that the best thing you can do is to get lost, right? So if you get lost, all of a sudden you start to understand where things are. And if you can understand where, because you know where it's not. Same thing in a math class, we get something wrong, and getting it wrong is actually the most useful thing that teaches us, oh, it's not there, it's over here. So you define things in the negative and the positive. So it's very similar with LLMs. Someone recently did an experiment, it actually might have been MIT, pardon me, where they took LLM, they created a map of New York City, where I am today, and they made it entirely from language, newspaper reports, a lot of language, a vast amount of text, but they took all this stuff and they put it together and they created a map of New York. And functionally, it was okay. But every once in a while, it would be like Harry Potter. And it would like completely change, completely mess things up. It would put things into, magical portals from the south of the city, and you'd end up like under the water or whatever. If you do that, of course, with law, you're gonna break something, right? And that's the fear of lawyers who are trying to use these things. And again, at least up until recently, big companies they're playing with these LLM tools, but they're not actually using legal AI in operations for two reasons. One, they don't trust it. And two, they don't want to create the bomb that blows them up inside their own law firm. Now, there's a lot of exceptions to that. Darrow is an exception to that. They're taking, as I understand it, open source intelligence and putting it together with legal claim information and maybe a lot more. And thank you to Ben and to the entire team for having me here today. So that's important to understand, right? That there's things holding people back. And this is one of those things. They don't want a Harry Potter and send their clients into a trough. And that happened immediately, of course, with a bunch of famous cases. Lawyers now know not to do that. People are working on hallucinations. But this isn't a solved problem, right? We're actually failing at this. And what happens if we actually get good at understanding and deal with the Harry Potter problem of magical models of the world that we're trying to update? Well, if systems actually get good at understanding, but what happens if you don't? One of the things I'm seeing in a lot of legal AI applications these days is they produce this really beautiful sounding text and it looks really good. But when you bite the apple, it just turns to sawdust or porridge in your mouth. And everything is kind of the same. Looks really good on the surface. It produces this median document, but it's not real. And the reason it's not real or it's not as useful as it could be is the person writing it never read it. So you have essentially people are creating these legal documents. When they're successful, people are creating these legal documents that are generated entirely by AI and read by no one. If they're read by anyone, it's by other AIs. So the AI understanding, if it's successful, is wiping out our understanding. And there's a concept called de-skilling, where if you have an autonomous vehicle, you start to lose the ability to drive, right? If you have maps, who reads maps these days? Nobody. Some people are trained to do this in difficult environments because GPS can get knocked out and what have you. But basically, nobody reads maps anymore. So you lose the skill of doing that. And maybe we don't need map reading, but we certainly need understanding. And instead of AI actually helping us understanding, for the lawyers amongst us, there's no meeting of the minds between the AI I'm using and the human I'm trying to communicate, much less with the AI that's reading, with the human that's trying to use the AI that reads. So even if the AI is perfect, even if we solve the world model problem, the understanding problem, which we haven't yet at all by a country mile, even if we solve that, it creates a new problem. It essentially lobotomizes humans from understanding this stuff. And you can't be a lawyer and do that. You have to mind meld with these things or you're toast. If you're just spewing complaints out into the atmosphere, again, it's happening in Brazil and America and a lot of other places, you have no idea what's happening. You're doomed. You're gonna end up under the East River at some point, and there's gonna be water all around you, and you're going to drown. It's gonna kill people. And it will literally kill people at some point. So the other thing that I see in the legal AI market these days is that we have excessive deference to engineering skill sets in domains requiring deference to legal ones. So lawyers, for 2020, I was speaking to the American lawyer media. It was one of the big talks of the whole conference. It's the biggest conference in the United States and for a lot of legal markets. And a lot of other famous celebrities that were there. So anyway, the people that came to the talk, I said, essentially, it's time to wake up, right? This thing is happening. It's going to radically change what you're doing. And nobody listened. People hit the snooze button. And then 2 years later, bam, right? This OpenAI popped up and made massive innovations. And that's, again, that innovation is going to compound. People are awake now, but they're so startled. It's like someone who's been woken up and has to jump into a race. And that panic causes excessive deference to engineering talent, which has no idea what law is or what they're doing. And even if they did, their AI, they don't know what their AIs are doing. So if you're building bridges, or think of it this way, it's as if people are trying to build bridges, but they have no idea what physics is. Not a clue. What's going to happen? They're going to fall down and people are going to die. Not because most of the bridges aren't good. Most of them will be good because they're going to emulate other bridges, but they're going to be unique black swan situations where understanding the physics or understanding that something is different is really, really important. And if you don't do that, you hit this risk of, it's like a lot of early AI, a lot of statistical systems trading options in the securities market, trillions and trillions of dollars, 20 or 30 trillion a year in some cases, bigger than the economy. This stuff really worked really, really well initially, but then a black swan event would happen and it would go off the rails and people would lose their entire funds. They were wiped out, which happened to long-term capital management, right? This is one example of this. So if you're building bridges, but you have no clue how physics works, the bridges are going to fall down at some point, and you don't know when and which ones. So my thesis today is super simple. Real legal AI, well-formed legal AI is verifiable. And it's not like software code engineering at all in some ways, which is tested. I mean, there are tests, they're just not legal tests. It has to be verifiable and falsifiable from a legal perspective by legal experts. And if you don't do that, you're screwed. Pardon my language, but like it's going to fall down with great certainty. And if it's going to fall down with great certainty 1 out of 100 times or 20 out of 100 times, you have to spend as much time checking it as a user as you do, writing it yourself, right? Which doesn't help anybody in efficiency. So to solve the legal market problem, these systems have to be verifiable and falsifiable, at least when we get to actual litigation and actual contracts, right? Not the stuff that happens before necessarily, but the actual stuff that happens. Otherwise, it's going to fail. And that's what a legal engineer is, in my view. Eric, who's running an association in this, can talk to this, but Eric Deshawn, who's on this call, but like a legal engineer verifies stuff. She or he doesn't just say, oh, it looks pretty good, let's roll. They actually have to verify, audit, test things in a way that a bridge engineer does, aircraft engineer does. And I'll give you an example in the aerospace space in a second. I was also, in addition to being an aerospace GC, I was fortunate to design and lead the spin out of Stanford, a company called Lex Machina. Lex Machina is used by most of the top 100 law firms in the US. It's used, I think, by every federal legal function in the US, and a ton of global activity, right? Because the litigation market in the US is very global, especially for IP and things. The reason that company did well and still does well is because it has a science function. They verify everything. That company has a very, very extreme version of assume nothing. And in fact, we assumed all data were false until proven otherwise. That's not the sense I get today. Today, it's just like, let's try a bunch of stuff. The LLM is so powerful and becoming more compounding that it's a potential disaster waiting to happen. And it will happen. Like, I'm predicting that people that don't do verification, things will blow up, right? If they're talking about filing the actual motions and doing these things. You can verify them through legal work, the humans, but you also need some automation if you want the advantage of the automation of the LLMs. So let me give you an example that's a better system, a better model for our market to follow, and that's aerospace. Despite the chaos that's going on around the world today, we had a flying car called the Hana at a company I was working with. And that system, which I got to become intimately familiar with, it has power systems, it has navigation systems, it has communication and flight control systems. There's mechanical stuff going on, as well as digital and different kinds of things. And different planes have different types of, and drones have different types of other systems. Autonomy, right? It can be one of those systems. So risk detection, that kind of thing. And then there's structure. We need legal subsystems for institutional AIs, whether they're legal AI or whether they are AIs that are not legal, just government or anything else. If we don't have those legal subsystems, people are just going to use LLMs to do stuff, and it will be it's going to hurt a lot of people. And one of the reasons for that is there's an almost infinite amount of complexity in the legal domain. How does it interact with what humans do, and how does this stuff happen? And how do you get a dictatorship or the most free country in the world, or people that are happy or unhappy? Those are infinitely complex. How do you make a justice system efficient and just at the same time, right? These are incredibly complicated questions. And engineers who haven't been trained in this have no idea how to address them, how to design for them, much less how to do it. It's as if you had power engineers doing, I don't know, the systems that they're landing gear, right? They have no clue how to do that, right? Even though there's some things that are relevant in their skill set. So what you really have to do is define a box around this infinite complexity and use compounding expertise to keep on doing that. AI engineers today, they have code repositories, they have hacking, and they have some engineering, right? How do you scale like systems so they work better and better? And scale is all you need, right? You need scale in the box and expertise in the box. If you don't have that defined parameter around this infinite complexity, you will absolutely fail. And you'll be way more ignorant and you can't verify these systems. The other thing that aerospace has is certification. You cannot fly anything unless it's been through the works. Maybe those systems aren't as efficient as they could be. Maybe they're sloppy. Maybe they let things out that shouldn't be let out. But the idea of being able to certify something is incredibly important. Nobody's doing this today. And we're heading for disaster, both in institutional AI systems, as well as particularly in legal AI. Anyway, that's kind of it. I think I'm going to give the rest of my time to questions and conversation. I have a lot of thoughts as well about regulation and how we can do that, but I'll defer my time back to Ben. Ben, over to you.
Hi. Yes, Joshua, thank you. One question that I have, several questions here in the Q&A, but I'll ask first, I'll really love the comparison between legal engineer and what you described in the aerospace. And one question that I have in mind is that I spoke with folks from the aerospace and defense lately, and certification and verification is very challenging today if you want to make sure the AI is doing what you want it to do, because how AI is really work. What is your thought about that? Because essentially, we don't really know a lot how AI is working behind the scenes, even the engineers and the developers. So is it even possible to incorporate AI in legal in places that we have to make sure or must accept certain, I don't know, like verify certain characteristics or properties?
Yeah.
What is your stance on that?
It's a great question, and then I can take Santosh on the chat line, and I encourage you to add questions there too. Also had a question. Even if all you have is a pure black box, DNN, you can create a completely different black box DNN as long as it's different, and that actually helps to verify the first box. So if you use completely different ways, it can't be the same company doing it because they're going to cheat. There's no way you could. It's like if I'm Bristol Myers Squibb, I can't do my own drug trials. It's impossible. Like you might unintentionally leak information. Like you can't do it in a rigorous, verifiable way. So it has to be a different company, but you could have a different black box doing it. The second thing, again, the powerful tool that you have as an analyst, whether you're interested in law or you're just purely AI, you can assume that all the data are false until proven otherwise. You can audit that system stochastically with humans who are going to cross-test it, and that's really useful. A lot of people lie on those tests, like they cheat. They will just come up with someone and they say someone's in their pocket and say, oh, this is great. And that's going to be like the engineering firm that signed off on those dams in Brazil a couple of years ago, and entire villages got wiped out because they certified the dam was okay when it wasn't because of pressure, right? And that happens a lot. So you can verify it. The other thing you can do is you can flow it out to your user. Assume that all of your checks are going to fail and flow it out to your users. And again, it's just one example, but we did all of those checks. We had humans doing the really hard things. We had machines doing everything like right to the horizon of what the machines could do, but we test everything. And then even when we did all of that and a lot of manual review in addition to the computation and a combination of hybrids of both, we assumed it was still wrong. And we asked our user base to find the bugs. So to many eyes, all bugs are shallow, as a software coder would say. We had federal judges and clerks looking for stuff. We had academics who have unlimited time in a way, right? Not really, but like they have way more time than most people to just grind into data. And they would tell us when we were wrong. And because that assumption became a powerful incentive, both to build the product better, to build the AI infrastructure better, and to build the human science function. But people are doing this stuff and they have no science function. They have no idea that they even need to ask these questions, which is great. Like selling product that says, here's what's happening in the litigation space. They have no idea if it's correct or not. So you need to have essentially a chief science officer, a Spock or Spockette or whoever, who says, I'm responsible for testing these things. And even then you're going to need to has to be an outside certification that's professionally managed, maybe by the legal industry or a subset of the legal industry, per Eric's thought. So anyway, happy to go back to that question too, if there's time. It's a great one. But there's ways of doing this, right? And the answer is, don't assume you can't, and don't assume you're right, and you attack the problem, right? And you're very open about what you can't do. When we rolled out an alpha product to our customers, said, this is an alpha, don't trust this. But they still got tons of useful stuff from it, but they knew to be paranoid that they had to cross-check their results. So confidence scores, this is probably a conference in itself, but to be able to do confidence scoring in all AI functions, especially legal AI, is critical. And bridge engineers do this, right? They over-engineer things. Like there's a whole field that do this. Second question was like, we use analogical reasoning in law, in India, Britain, US, Canada, Commonwealth countries. We use analogical reasoning a lot in case law representation. I believe Israel as well, pardon my ignorance. But so essentially, how do you do that with legal machines? Well, you can't do it with logic, but fortunately, we're not limited to logical AI. You can use statistical. And if you think of playing like a machine that plays Go, the game of Go, it's infinitely complex, essentially, it's essentially infinitely complex, but you can have weights of different things and different analogies that you can have relative strength on. So that's a super complicated legal engineering question in terms of how you get it done, but there's ways of doing that for sure. And you can break out, we can maybe talk about it offline, but there are certainly ways you can do analogical reasoning using computation, but it just can't be dumb. Like the system needs to know that the relative weights of the analogies have different kinds of strengths and different kinds of relationships, and they don't generally know that now. Like someone has to build that structure so it's going to emulate but do that. And if we can do that, the system will be massively improved. People aren't ready for this, but that if we can solve that problem well, which is going to take serious work from AI scientists, computer scientists, and a lot of lawyers in the same room with the AI, with the massive LLMs. If we do that, it's going to make the system radically better and more transparent. No one's prepared for that either. So that's coming. Back to you, Ben.
And it's really interesting because we're talking about other fields, but I think one of the challenges here in legal is that sometimes you don't know how the reward function looks like, and like what is good and what is not good. If you like, you're going to your example in AlphaGo or like other aerospace and stuff like that, you can see if it's doing the right job or not. You have something you can measure. But how do you do it in
none
legal?
of that. Zero of that. We have to build it. It's like, how many people are on this call? So let's see. There are 48 participants, right? Sorry, I'm sure it's going to be hundreds later, but like
2,000 later,
2,000 later, as soon as they hear about how awesome this was. But like, it's 50 people. Are we going to do it or not? Like, and we have different organizations, but like, it's this group. No one else is going to do it for us. I get attacked by hackers who are like, not the software coders, right? It's just like, oh, I'm doing great. Ministry of experts. We got it. It's good. It looks pretty good. It's like, you have no idea. It looks good. It looks like a beautiful feast that you've discovered in a lovely chateau in Loire Valley of France. But when you bite into the turkey leg, after the appropriate things, it turns to sawdust. And you don't know which things are real and which ones aren't. It looks pretty good, and it's a amazing simulacrum, right? And it may be understanding something, but you don't. There's no meeting of the minds, right? This is a little bit of an abstract problem. There's no meeting of the minds between the people who are building, creating the bridges, and the people who are like, and what the bridge is doing, what the AI is doing. Like they don't know. So the AI, I don't want to say explain itself because that's a bridge too far, probably, but we have to verify the systems and we have to test them in like 5 or 6 different ways. Bridge designers, they test in modeling and they test to extreme extents. They test the materials. They go in and and then they hammer stuff, right? Despite all the digital everything and very experienced engineers and very experienced simulation stuff. And I'm going to talk about this in the new book. The old book was called On Legal AI, and the successor is coming out shortly. And it deals with, I love the engineering concepts, but not what's happened to lawyers these days who just like give up and say, the engineers know what they're doing and they're in a panic and their hair's on fire. People are going to die. Like their cases are going to be lost. Like it's not a good situation right now. So, I get attacked for that because it looks pretty good, but we don't know. We have no idea if the reward function is correct. Even if you're a deep seeker and you're like going a zillion miles an hour at like a massively compounding rate, you need a reward function to get DeepSeek or anything to work. And we don't know what that reward function is yet because we haven't defined it, because the engineers don't know to ask the question. So anyway, that's the challenge I see. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's even more challenging because we don't know the reward function. We don't know the world model of this, like the AI that we're using. And back to your first example, lawyers today use AI to draft papers or draft documents, and also to verify or do their to verify some of the legislation and stuff like that. So they use AI like from both sides, and as you said, nobody reads, nobody check, nobody verify.
Anymore.
So,
we're getting de-skilled instead of getting empowered, which is weird. But sorry, go ahead, Ben.
So we have a couple of questions here in the chat, in the Q&A. I'll ask the question. Let me know if I think people want here to. How do you see the relationship between I think big tech companies and the new? It's a very political question maybe, but the new U.S. administration playing out in the AI regulation, and I think the new administration have a lot of maybe your stance about that.
So it's a great question. I view, and it's about AI regulation specifically, Ben?
Yes, exactly.
So it's a great question. And let's assume that we're half people who hate Elon Musk and half people who love him or his stuff that he's doing, whatever and I will truly say I don't care. I'm an empiricist. I don't believe in political parties. I believe in looking at the effects of things. And the model I use is in the first book on legal AI. It's called EDEN. EDEN stands for Empirical Design Evolution Net. And again, we're going to apply this to AI regulation in the US and in Europe, because that was one of the other preceding questions too. So empirical design evolution net. Be empirical. What's going to happen and what's the effect? We may hate a political party. We may love a political party. I know, again, in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, everyone agrees with each other, so it's not an issue. But like in most, people disagree, right? So my attitude, and that's what the Lex Machina attitude was, I don't care. I want to see human utility and benefit over a long period of time. In Europe, we have 2 different kinds of risks based on 2 different kinds of conjectures. The libertarian risk, which people are really focused on, is there's no regulation. Particularly American companies destroy everyone. They suck up all their data. They take the goodness out of Europe, and they steal everyone's privacy. And there's no right to be forgotten. That results in oligarchies, which is a real risk in the United States. Let's be really clear. We've seen what happened to Rome. There's a real risk of an oligarchy happening and crystallizing, whatever. And I'm not certain that's happening, but there's a conjecture out there that has real risk around it. Monopolies happen, right? So you had the sugar trust and the timber trust and the oil trust and all that stuff. That's a disaster. And you essentially get a kind of dictatorship of wealth in a way. So that's a real risk, and that has its social Darwinism risk, all these sorts of things, and that can be horrific. And it again ends up in dictatorship. On the other hand, the other conjecture for Europe is that it's regulating itself to death. I have a lot of friends in Europe who are great entrepreneurs, and they can't start companies there. It is incredibly hostile and burdensome. The only people who can afford to comply with all these laws are Facebook, Google, Microsoft. Microsoft does a very good job. I mean, I know that their president, he's very on top of things. Like, he is not, they're very, very sharp now, and that's from bitter experience, but they're much, much more diplomatic as well as finessey, if you will, on that stage. But the conjecture that's opposite of the libertarian conjecture is that overregulation is going to kill European entrepreneurship. My friends tell me that GDPR has wiped out a generation of entrepreneurs in Europe. So, and people die because of that too. If you overregulate AI, the innovation's not going to happen. And then people die because they don't get that great innovation, or that their social security check takes 20 years to get because the legal system is so slow. There's maybe 1 billion social security cases in the world. It's probably the biggest dispute center that extant, not just in the US, obviously everywhere. If you don't get your check on time, you could die. Your kids could starve, or they could get a disease they didn't need to get, right? Or didn't to get treatment they didn't need to get. So this is life. Legal system is life and death. We're going to cure cancer or not based on how we regulate and contract with AI. So the risk one is you don't cure cancer because there aren't the incentives. It's not structured so that things can do it. And the second risk of overregulating AI, and it's not just Europe. Europe is people adopt that. So Brazil just really adopted a version of the GDPR, and they're on track to doing that for its AI regulation. Not only do people die because you didn't come up with the innovation, they die because the economic activity moves elsewhere. My friends, they moved to the Bay Area. I love the Bay Area. Don't get me wrong. It's really beautiful. It's very special. People want to change the world there, but there's also nothing special about it. Like, it's special because people go there, or they have. And why do they leave Europe? And this is why. It's too burdensome to start an AI company in Europe. People are doing this, right? I have friends who are doing it, and they're successful at it. But it's Hugging Face is an exception. And Mistral, they're exceptions. There should be tons of those. There should be hundreds and thousands of companies like that. Why is the US doing so well? Maybe they're under-regulating, but this is a very complex regulation issue, and people are dumb because we're using our emotions to. I'm angry about this. People are using their emotions to do AI regulations. This is how do you build a system that operates well? This is a legal subsystem of our entire nation state, right? How do you do that? So empirical. Be empirical. It's the net benefit to humans in all these places, in Europe, in Brazil, in America, in Israel, in India. Like, billions of lives are at stake. Be empirical about it. Ignore political factions. Second, design from a human perspective, but design from behind the veil of ignorance to help an individual. 3, evolution, right? I'll get to that in a second. Net is look at the total output. Yes, we want to overregulate. Yes, there are a lot of bad things happening with, socially Darwinistic companies. You have to manage that so it doesn't become a cancer. But the real answer is you don't want any extreme. You actually have to modulate this, which no one thinks about, but you got to modulate it. And then evolution is you improve your system. You improve your regulatory system over time, and you let performance, the empirical performance, inform that. So we have to do exactly what we're not doing right now, which is remove emotion from the picture. Sorry, go ahead.
It's fascinating, Joshua, and I can keep talking to you for hours. I think it leads us perfectly to our panel. So I want to thank you, Joshua, for your session. There are more questions. I'll send it to you, and you can we can find a way to approach that. I think it's really challenging these days, and our panelists is some of them from Europe. I think they have some thoughts on what you just said. So thank you again, Joshua, for your time today and your perspective. It's always delightful. Hope
It's
to
an
see you
honor to
soon
be
again.
here. And the good news is we don't know what the right answer is. We have two conjectures and we should debate them like crazy. And again, thank you so much. Find me on LinkedIn. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Great, guys. We'll move to our panel. Just a second. I want to see that our panelists are here. You can turn on your video and microphone. Yes. Hey, everyone.
Hey there, Ben.
Hey.
Hi there.
Okay, we're ready for who's responsible for what panel. I hope you have some thoughts about what Joshua just discussed, and we can elaborate on that also. So we have a group of experts here today with us, and I'm not gonna read the full bios because it's gonna take the whole time. I'm just gonna highlight some key points on who you are, and then I'll give you the floor to introduce yourselves. So let's get started. I'll start with Noga Rosenthal, the General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Ampersand. She has more than 15 years in experience in global privacy, compliance, and public policy, including shaping privacy industry standards and advising on federal privacy legislation. Dr. Catalina Guanta, Associate Professor in Private Law and Technology from Utrecht University. She also leads HumanAIDS, a research initiative focused on understanding the impact of content monetization on social media, and works with the European Commission on digital consumer protection. Dr. Ravid Dotan, an AI ethics advisor, researcher, and speaker. Ravid specializes in helping tech companies, investors, and policymakers to develop responsible AI frameworks and strategies. Dr. Giovanni De Gregorio is a PLMJ chair in law and technology in Cattolica Global School of Law, a legal expert in constitutional law, digital policy, and AI governance, and the author of Digital Constitutionalism in Europe. Last but not least, Hadassah Durkach, the Director of Policy and Delivery at the Responsible AI Institute. Hadassah focuses on AI governance, certification, and regulatory strategy, helping organizations implement responsible AI practices. And before I hand it over to you, to the five of you, we have both a chat and a Q&A section as part of the Zoom meeting. I'm not sure we're gonna have enough time to review all the questions, but if anyone has questions, you can put them there. Now I'd like to invite you to briefly introduce yourself. And Noga, let's start with you, and then please pass it along to the next panelist.
Sure. Again, I'm Noga Rosenthal. I'm at a ad tech TV company here in New York. And again, Ben, just I think one of the differentiators with me is that I've been in self-reg for a long time, which I think may impact AI, where companies set up their own rules because laws can't keep up. Ravit, I'll turn it to you.
Hi. Yeah, I work in the field of AI governance. So I cover all range of issues. What should organizations be doing? Regulations and standards, risks, mitigations. I do it under two hats. One is consulting and advising to all kinds of organizations in all sectors. And the other is research to learn empirically and from previous work, you know, what is it that we should be doing?
Mm-hmm. Who are you choosing, Ravid, to pass the torch?
Giovanni.
That's my turn. Thank you so much. Of course, pleasure to be here. And I'm Giovanni, and actually, first of all, I'm an academic working actually on the problems related to the regulation of digital technologies related particularly, to the role of online platforms and all the problems and issues and opportunities that comes with the intersection with fundamental rights, the problem exercise related to the exercise of powers, by public and private actors and what it means for constitutional democracy. So basically, this is my area that goes, in so many different directions, of course, from, questions related to AI governance, to data protection, even to free speech. And, you can even just imagine if you're here, I don't need to say more than that. And then Catalina.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Hi, Ben. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Catalina Gaunt. I'm an associate professor at Utrecht University. I work very much on social media governance, so AI used in social media, but also broader on regulation. And European regulation, as we have heard, is a little bit of a controversial topic these days, and I hope that we can jump into that later on. But also what I bring to my research is a background in consumer protection and a lot of lessons that we can learn from that in terms of AI regulation. And perhaps, let's see, Hadassah, yeah.
Yes, that leaves me. Thank you so much, Catalina. And lovely to meet everyone. Thanks, Ben, of course, for the invitation. Looking forward to this session. So my name is Hadassah Drukarc. I'm the Director of Policy and Delivery at the Responsible AI Institute, coming into this discussion with a very similar background to, I think, or at least in terms of what I do, to what Lavi just mentioned, right? Helping organizations with their AI governance programs and implementing the different mechanisms, policies, processes, and practices that they need on the ground. We are a member-based nonprofit, and so I work directly with a lot of organizations, mainly enterprise, but across a very large range of industries, including healthcare, energy, finance, etc. And so I will bring kind of that perspective to this conversation, right? Like how are organizations actually operating on the ground, right? Back to you, Ben.
Cool. Cool, guys. So let's dive into the panel. I want to start with what excites you the most, because we all the time we focus on, or not all the time, but a lot of us, I'm sorry, the panel here. Yes, now I see it. We talk about the risk and the challenges of AI, but let's start with good, and let's start with what excites you the most. And I want to start with Noga and Catalina. And Noga, you work in industries where AI plays a huge role. What an example of AI that's being used in a way that excites you the most?
Sure. So for our industry, the advertising industry, it's helping to personalize ads. But that's been going on, Ben, for years. So, it's just taking your information, whatever you're doing on the web, and saying, okay, you may be interested in buying a car or taking a trip to France. Having said that, I think there's also room for to use AI in privacy. Maybe not needing such personal information, maybe not needing all of your history web browsing history to create a profile on you, which again is so sensitive. So I think for me personally, it's that part of it, the privacy part, that's the most exciting. Again, in the advertising industry where there's a lot of scrutiny around what we're doing. On a personal level, though, I studied for certification in AI this past month, and I used ChatGPT to test myself, to learn new ideas. So that I've really been enjoying using that, just saving time and learning new things.
Yeah, I agree. For education is amazing. Catalina, for you, you're a researcher in content creation and influencer law. What do you think about advertising and media? And is there a new creative methods that we can harness with AI? Is AI enable us to do more creative stuff than before? What are the opportunities that you see in that?
So there's definitely, just to build on what Noga was also saying, there's definitely an opportunity here. And I think the creator industry is very much trying to understand how they can use generative AI, for instance, in content creation. Of course, that also comes with a lot of fears because there's going to be copyright issues. There's going to be a lot of problems also with the authenticity of creators, because this is one of the most important things in the creator economy. But perhaps parking this type of application for a second, second, I'd like to perhaps also go back to a question of research. And we're going to hear very soon from Arvind Narayanan. And I saw a tweet that he did, I think it was yesterday, and he was referring to how AI can also help in the legal, actually in the research field. So not in the legal research field, but generally with research, because he was saying that overproduction, so people are actually doing too much research nowadays. And he's saying, well, you know, actually AI could also write some of these papers for us. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do believe that there are a lot of opportunities in legal research for different types of language models to be used for very specific tasks. And Ben, you have been also at our natural legal language processing workshop last year. So it's a very nice interdisciplinary workshop for those of you who do not know it, that focuses very much on the use of large language models and just language models in general before, you know, there was this entire hype with LLMs and OpenAI. With very specific tasks, such as, you know, summarization or different types of information extraction. And I think for the legal field, so for practice, but also for research, this can really lead to very specific tasks that can make our life better. For instance, imagine maybe a literature review that could give some initial information, which you can then double check. And this is, I think, also something that a judge from the UK, it was an appellate judge, who was saying, I'm using ChatGPT to make an overview of a field of law. I know that field of law. I can check it, so I can absolutely evaluate if what I'm getting is good or bad, but I'm just not bothered summarizing it. So I think that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I agree. And Ravit, I wanna hear your perspective here about how we treat AI as in human-like terms. And I think nowadays when agents it's not just ChatGPT now, we use agent and we want them to do job for us or some work for us. And so I think this maybe the challenges here might be even more, and we need to address that. But is it from, I don't know, from a philosophical perspective and from a research perspective and from your experience, what do you stance on that? Is AI changing the way we think about intelligence, creativity, or even trust? And what do you think about humans treat AI as in human-like terms?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot in this question, and I'm kind of thinking, what's the best angle for it? Yeah, there's definitely this tendency to think of chatbots, or people want to call them agents, as you've mentioned, but to treat bots as kind of humanoids. And it's really natural because that's how the communication goes, right? They are purposefully designed to make it feel very similar to the way that we interact with other people. And even, you know, myself, even though I know better, right? When I interact with a chatbot, I almost feel like I'm talking to someone else. And, you know, what I found is that when I think about it I mean, it's misleading, right? So that's the first problem. It's misleading, and it can lead to, you know, a host of issues that we've seen, right? People get advice from chatbots to, you know, jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, right? Or, you know, we do have this kid who committed suicide. Not funny. I'm laughing because it's so bad. It's the only way to deal with that. You know, treat it as a psychologist, treat it like a girlfriend. There are a lot of risks there, but I want to talk about how natural this tendency is. I mean, they are designed, right, to make us see that. And the second point I want to mention is that I think overcoming this tendency could go through understanding that we can get more use out of them if we don't see them that way. I'll give an example. So for me, as I said, it's very natural also to kind of feel as if I'm talking to another person who's giving me advice, who's serving as a sounding board. But when I do that, I find that my products are actually less good. Right? I think we're all still learning how to use generative AI, and I am too. For me, one of the uses is for accelerating writing processes, and creating fictional scenarios, like when I need case studies, for example. And what I find is that when I'm stuck on this imagination that I'm talking with someone else, first of all, I get annoyed. Like, why isn't it doing it correctly? I told it to do it this way, not that way, right? But then also I'm like, this is not the advice that I need. It's frustrating. So recently I switching to this other mindset where I am just using it as a tool to fail faster. And so I always start with my own ideas, right? And one method that I use, I'll record myself, transcribe it, right? And then I'll just like, bloop, all of my ideas, just like sort them out, like organize them, right? And I might ask, yeah, like, what's an outline? And it needs to be, you know, in the style of this or that, because sometimes I need to write in different styles, right? And then it will give me something, and I consider it as me failing faster, right? Because when you write something, you'll do an outline. The first one will be bad. The second one will also be bad. The third one, slightly less bad, right? But when you do it just by yourself, right, it will take a while, and you'll need to develop it more and until you see how bad it is, right? So you'll need to write the paragraphs, right? So I'm using it. This is just me, all me, failing faster. Give me the outline, write a thing. Oh, this is so terrible. I can't do that, right? So for me, the switch to this is not someone else I'm talking to, this is me failing faster, is both helping me get better products and protecting me from this illusion that I do think is harmful, that we're talking to some kind of humanoid.
It's interesting to understand what is the company's intentions in that, whether they want you to think and to think you talk to a human like, or for them in a business perspective, what is maybe it's better for them to convey you that it's just a tool, just another computer, another brain that you can use. And I want to bring Hadassah to this panel, and like you work with organizations and to implement responsible AI, and I'm really curious because we discussed this before. What is your definition to really responsible AI from your perspective, from your experience? Because there is a lot of terms and definitions there. Maybe you can touch on the practical approach that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for that, it's a really interesting question. To follow up on something Ravi just said, right? I think in terms of that interaction with these, let's say an AI chatbot, right? It's really context dependent. Context dependent, and I think outcome dependent also. Just to give one example, which just made me smile as you were talking, is yesterday evening, I working on a different project, transcriptions, inputted it into ChatGPT, had an outcome that I wanted to reach. And I actually wanted to know what the prompt was that ChatGPT thought I could best ask to get to the outcome so that I could do this with all the other transcripts that I had. And so it came to the conclusion, gave me a prompt. I tried it on another transcript. And a conversation between me and ChatGPT started where it kind of came to an outcome that wasn't based on the transcript that I had, but I was interested. So I asked it. Previously, when I would ask it, it would say, oh, sorry, that you're right, this wasn't included in the transcript or something like that. Or it would say something like, so let's say like an oops, this was an oops moment, essentially. But it actually came back with a response. The day ended, and I went to my husband and said to him, I actually had a really great conversation. He was like, oh, yeah, with ChatGPT yesterday. And in that moment, you kind of realize like how you're interacting with that system. But I think the context, and that's where I'll bring it to what responsible AI is, the context and the outcome really matter there. Because I could talk to my mother, I could talk to my brother, I could talk to a friend, and they could also like tell me something that I shouldn't necessarily rely on in that context. And the same applies to ChatGPT here, right? So I think you need to understand the scenario that surrounds it. You need to understand what the outcome is that you're looking at. And you also need to understand the context. And per context, it may be different. And that applies to responsible AI as well. So I think there as well, what responsible AI is, it's highly context dependent. And I think when you work in this space, and maybe that applies to all of us, you tend to think only in terms of these, how you see this concept until you realize that it has many, many different meanings across different contexts, across different organizations working with it in different ways. But just to kind of instill my thoughts in terms of what I think responsible AI is, the bottom line, and I think it's driven by mitigation of risks, is that AI is developed, deployed, and used in a way that benefits individuals and society at large, alongside benefiting companies, right? Going back to those benefits that we were talking about before, not only individuals, but also companies and organizations obviously use this to enhance their efficiency and make their work better for themselves and for those that are using it. I think beyond risk mitigation, that's one component of it. I do think there's a component to responsible AI that is seen more as a business, like a business case. So there's a lot more to it than saying, hey, there are harms involved in AI, we need to mitigate those. But also, if we put responsible AI governance at the forefront of what we do, we can leverage it to get the right people or to establish the right culture within their company, to actually build better products. Going to the conversation we were talking about just before, to create more trust. And there's research conducted on how responsible AI is tied to revenue and profit increases and culture building and the like. And so anyway, how we see this at the Responsible AI Institute is that because for those reasons and the fact that there are so many different factors involved, it is a very multidimensional and also cross-functional effort at its core that includes, you know, the consideration for various outcomes, including risk mitigation, but also these others that depend on the organization that you're working with. I'll go into details on like kind of what that looks like from a governance perspective, but I think the context is really key there.
Yeah, I agree. And Giovanni, I want to bring you to that to continue that. First, what do you think is responsible AI from your perspective? And maybe you can add your constitutional or international law and states law to this talk. And essentially, if I'm relating to what Ravit said and Hadassah said, one question that I want to add to you, if you can comment, is maybe we want more than we can achieve from AI. We want it to be very safe, very responsible. We want to integrate it safely and responsible. But is it even possible? What do you think about that?
Thanks. That's kind of an interesting discussion because whenever we talk about responsible AI, whenever we talk about fairness, whenever we talk about trustworthiness, whenever we talk about ethics of AI, we hear a lot of things around these concepts, you know, and different voices from, you know, philosophers, computer scientists, lawyers, and, you know, like practitioners and so many other different people. The point is actually when we put these things in practice, no matter how we see the world, how this should look like according to ethical principles, things are very different, you know? And the things actually that is quite interesting to say, even if you think about, yes, that we'd like to see the peace in the world and whatever we want, actually, when we look even just at two examples of constitutional democracies, you know, I mean, at least European countries and the US, you find a completely different, you know, like point of view. So whenever we talk about how AI should be responsible, you know, what are the ethical principles that should apply to, you know, to whatever, to an autonomous vehicles or even in content moderation, since also Catalina is here, you know? So, I mean, we are far from each other, you know? We're talking about two constitutional democracies that see, you know, the same thing as in two different ways, one as a problem and the other as an opportunity. And as far as we are going to see the world in this very polarized way, we'll never get anywhere, you know? So whenever we are going to continue talking about, yes, responsible AI, what does it mean? But then when we look at the policies or even at the legislation, since we talk about that at the beginning, we see like an ocean, you know, between the two places around the world, you know, but sure, I mean, we're still even speaking about constitutional democracy. So, you know, places where, you know, you could speak about the rule of law, places where you could speak about transparency, and these things should be, you know, on the same level. The fact is that it's not. So, I mean, and there are a lot of voices around that, you know, way I should look like. The fact is that, I mean, whatever we think about, when we look in practice how things are managed in terms of policies, I mean, this distance is embarrassing, to be fair, you know? So, and this actually raises a lot of questions that goes definitely beyond, you know, the realm of constitutional democracies that go more about who actually has the power to shape whom, you know? And I mean, in terms also even of industrial policy, and I don't need to add anything on that because it's quite clear, you know? And so, I mean, and this, of course, leads, of course, the EU to play a certain type of role of regulator, of course, for obvious reasons. But at a certain time, even don't think that the EU, you know, is not up to a certain point, is more aware of the situation at the moment. If you see the recent adoption of the the competitiveness compass was precisely a little bit of a wake-up call up to a certain point to say, guys, I mean, we care a lot about democratic values and fundamental rights, and I think that the EU will continue towards this road, but it's not just in digital policy. You can see even in environmental law, you see many other fields, but this does not mean that still, I mean, we do not need to find a balance between how we want to protect rights in a constitutional democracies and how we want to ensure a little bit that we have also some things that are also possible elsewhere. So that is a little bit the constitutional challenges we are living, but I do not see that whenever, just to close because otherwise it's too long, my answer, whenever actually we see talks about responsible AI, we need to understand where we are in the world, because this could mean very, very different things, not to mention even opposite things wherever we are in the world. And I really care that we need this fair and open conversation about that, rather than, always falling within, what an autonomous vehicle should look or how this information should be provided online.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to ask Catalina and then Noga. Catalina, we discussed before about the new guidelines by the European Commission, and I'm curious to hear what is the EU currently doing in this space. And after that, Noga, what is from the industry perspective in a global company, how responsible that looks like? And to take what Giovanni just mentioned, it can't look the same in every place, in every company, in every country, in every state. And maybe we need to tailor-made the responsible AI practices. So I'll start with Catalina and then I'll go to Noga.
Thanks so much. I think that's such an important point. And also just to build on what Giovanni was saying when we're speaking about AI regulation, because we have some guidelines from the European Commission that were just published recently on the basis of the AI Act. Giovanni has written also a lot about the AI Act. So we have this piece of regulation right now, which is monumental in the European Union, that was passed last year. And it's supposed to start being applicable in phases up until 2027, I believe it was. And it's really going to even increase, the already quite heavy duties of companies. Although I do have to say that I very fundamentally disagree with what Joshua was saying earlier, that you just can't open a company in the European Union. You definitely can, but of course, then I think also what Giovanni was saying, there are different types of values that are embedded in regulation. And I have a few points here. So the first one is that it's very important when we speak about the regulation of AI to keep in mind, what jurisdiction we're talking about. That's what Giovanni was also saying. Different jurisdictions are going to have different values that they give priority to. So is innovation going to be more important than the safety of citizens? Because if we're looking at the guidelines that were published on one specific article of the AI Act, and that's Article 5. Article 5 is about prohibited practices. So the AI Act works with different layers of risk. And then we have this really super humongous level of risk where the European Union now is saying we're just going to prohibit certain practices. And examples are going to include social scoring or risk assessment in terms of criminal offenses, and basically, the typical Compass example. And these are things that have been thought through because they're supposed to protect different citizens, different consumers. Maybe just to finalize the points for now, this type of regulation has its own value because we do have to consider the types of risks that such technologies pose. We also, I think that it was, I think Noga was mentioning this earlier, that, we see that regulation is always really falling behind. And the AI Act is definitely an example of regulation that is thinking very much into the future. Although, and I leave this in a kind of a little bit of a mysterious conclusion, when we see that the US is now really pivoting to a very strong AI policy and also a lot of investments done in this field or to be done in this field, we see DeepSeek. The question is, we do have these values in the European Union, we have the AI Act, but what are we going to do with it if we're going to be caught in between geopolitical forces that might go beyond the political power of the EU to actually enforce it as the initial plan was?
Catalina, I would just, build off of that for global companies, they're going to be offering their services likely in Europe, right? So that's what happened to us with GDPR. We had offices in Europe. We had clients using us in Europe. We had consumers that were impacted by us in Europe. So we had to comply with we had to comply with GDPR. Same principle applies here. So again, I appreciate what Josh is saying, but I think if you look at your your company and how your executives are going to want to roll out their product in Europe too. They're not going to likely not going to say, okay, I'm not going to roll this out in Europe. So that may be the baseline that you're using anyway. And then there's going to be competitive factors that if your competitor is doing this and you're not complying with the law, or you're not up to their standards, and you're just, for instance, a US-based company, that may impact you too, because then why would I use you when I could use a safer product that's complying with the EU Act? So I think I appreciate what he was saying, but I think lessons learned, like, hey, you know what, GDPR like principles came to the US too, and those of us that had complied with the GDPR were ready for it in the US as well.
Interesting. Interesting. And Hadassah, maybe you can touch on that point. You probably worked with both companies, I don't know, from Europe and US, and one of the things I'm thinking of is our company truly stepping to take responsibility when AI-driven decisions go wrong and they implement or when they implement AI in their products, or there is a lot of responsible AI washing. I don't know if there is a term for that. Responsible AI washing, maybe should be talking about responsibility, but they're not doing. They're not taking real accountability.
I'll just chime in. It's called AI ethics washing.
AI ethics washing. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, we work with honestly mainly companies right now that are based in North America, and so we have some outside of the North American sphere. But I think it's actually very interesting working with those organizations. So I come from the Netherlands, and I have had experience working privacy and data protection there. And so working mainly with European organizations, and I remember kind of how that went back then. I do think the EU AI Act is somewhat different, at least like because it's so early days still in terms of what the impact is. And I'm hearing from a lot of organizations that I am talking to now in the Netherlands that they are seeing that, and across Europe in general, that they're seeing the sentiment across the organization itself. So not necessarily like the professionals that we're talking about that we're speaking, in this group right now, but the broader organization, leadership, and others don't see AI or the AI Act and all the regulation that's being developed around that necessarily as a compliance activity. They're seeing it more as a broader strategic opportunity. At least that's how I've understood it, coming from kind of that discussion. And so everyone wants to be at the table. So from what I've heard, like a lot, and I see that in the organizations that we work in the US with as well, a lot of people are very excited across the organization to hear more about what responsible AI is, to understand what governance means, how they need to drive that within their organization. Whereas I think previously with privacy and data protection, it was very much what programs do we need to put in place, do it, like whatever you need to do, go for it. But like it wasn't as much of a collective process. Now I'm looking at the rest of course, and Noga, maybe you in particular, right? And your experience working in practice. But those are the things that I've been hearing in terms of actually implementing AI governance within organizations. We take on a maturity-based approach. And I think it's important to do that because what mature means is very relative, not only to the industry, but also to the organization itself. We work with companies in energy, for instance, and each and every single one of them is different. And so the mere fact that they work in the energy sector or healthcare, for instance, right, quite a regulated sector of finance, doesn't mean that they have everything in order. Sure, they have that experience in different areas with more strict rules, but it really is driven by leadership within an organization on many fronts at this point, what's being done with AI. And that's because it's such a big topic that touches so many different practitioners and departments within an organization. So I'm not sure kind of like to what extent that really answers your question, Ben, but I do think that in practice, we're seeing a lot of different things. And I just think there's a shift in terms of how AI regulations approached as opposed to how previous regulations in this space, which obviously interlink, but have been approached.
Yeah. So I want to go to talk about approaches and ask Ravit about that. But I'll start with Giovanni and maybe Catalina about. I read your paper about recent paper, I think, structural asymmetric in digital markets. was really fascinating. And Giovanni, I discussed with you on the power shift, and maybe you can start talking about these two, because AI, well, as we understand, is giving us a lot of opportunities, but there is a lot of imbalances between tech companies and users. So what policy or mechanism do you think is most urgent to really ensure that AI is not exploiting more consumer vulnerabilities? And it's,
Thanks, Ben. Since this is a conversation, I'm not going to answer, this question, for one reason, because I mean, Catalina probably that comes after me this time, she could say something on consumer and the users, because what I wanted to stress now, that one of the important imbalance we are not talking about enough, it's the imbalance between the state and, in the governance of AI, because of course, I mean, the users, definitely we are in a situation where we do not count that much, when it comes to AI governance. I mean, even of course, there are some exceptions in the past, even if you think about some cases have shown like that users can count when they can coalesce or create some groups, but that's another story. It's interesting also to think about the path of connection and dependencies between public and private actors in the digital age. This is pretty much at the core of my research, actually, on digital constitutionalism, so that trying to underline how the traditional way in which we have been conceiving, like the state and the companies, the private actors and the public actors is not really there anymore, to be fair, or it's still there institutionally, but when we look at the practice of the thing, I think that the recent US elections have really shown how the incredible and famous public-private divide in the US, it's really there. But I mean, at the end, does not actually preempt any type of contact or very, very strong connection between the public and the private in the US. It's one of the constitutional safeguards that very often characterize also the rule of law. And it's pretty much happening the same in the EU, but with another type of, let's say, layout, if you want. If you look at all the co-regulatory processes that are characterizing AI governance in the EU, is nothing else seeing the public and the private increasingly coming together to set the rules that we are users we will be subject to. So this is actually a broader question for, to be fair, for our democratic system, for what we are living, because the imbalance that users are facing, most of the origin of this imbalance is because the state suffer a huge imbalance when it comes to this area, especially when it talks to AI. Of course, not in all sectors, of course, like in military and other stuff, even of course in that case there is public-private collaboration, but still, I think that the imbalance on the users is also the result of a broader imbalance of the state that it made some choices in the last 30 years just to leave the private sector to run some services. And now is realizing, at least the EU has realized, that these services are quite important for the public interest. And so if you leave everything, it's just about goodbye, so you'll never get back. And then they enter the logic of capitalism and so forth. So it's about, for the US, this is nothing new. And I mean, to be fair, it's nothing new, to be fair. It's always been like many of their services in the public interest have always been managed by the private sector. So that's why there is not a constitutional issue for them. Anyway, so that's the world we are living, but I will leave to Catalina also to talk more about the user as well.
Just two sentences on that. So I think that it's very important to consider the opacity of the technology economy, right? So if we're speaking about the development of, for instance, large language models right now, what's the knowledge and what's the literacy of the institutions that are supposed to keep some control on the market? That's the answer to this question is also going to trickle down in consumer protection. And we have seen this even with, very sophisticated business models that did not necessarily rely on technology, and some of them that relied on other technologies than AI, that the law still has a very hard time kind of catching and shaping what these practices are, because we have rules in the European Union that are very similar to the AI Act for other types of business practices. And we have seen that there has been quite a lot of divergence there. So I think that this complexity is only going to complicate matters even further.
Super interesting. And I think one of the challenges was in the title of this conversation is who's responsible for what, because what institution is responsible for what types of ethics and standards. And I think it leads me to Ravit, and maybe Ravit, you can help us take to this conversation to a more practical area. Like what organization needs to do, or if you think organization needs to hold any accountability of the product. And I'm pretty sure I know what you think about that. But what do you think organization needs to do, and what you're suggesting to them? And do you see them doing that, or based on your experience?
Yes, I do think organizations need to be proactive. I think it's a shared responsibility. Yeah, the users have responsibility, governments have responsibility, investors, everyone in the ecosystem, but definitely also the organizations who engage in AI in any way, not just developing, procurement, right? Also very important, deployment. So Hadassah mentioned maturity model. Yeah, it's a very strong approach in the field, right? It's not binary, either you're responsible or you're not. It's a journey. And that's something that's really important to understand, because there is this, there can be reluctance and fear, like, oh, it's too much, it's too burdensome, right? But it's fine to do it in stages. What I will say is that the trajectory that we are seeing in the industry, often organizations will start with something like a principles document or a framework, or they might designate someone to be in charge. And, it does make a lot of sense to start with things like that, especially in large organizations. However, the problem is that, you do these steps and they're supposed to be a first step, to actually implementing some practices in the organization. And that's exactly where we see this gap. So what we're seeing is a large portion of organizations doing these things that are, kind of more external facing signals, really, but they're not really doing the implementation part. And we're actually seeing stagnation in the industry. So we have surveys from McKinsey, for example, year after year, it's the same levels of implementation, even though we do see this explosion of frameworks and principles. And so if an organization is serious about its responsibility, not just for its stakeholders, but also for itself, because they understand the business value in it, then they need to tackle this gap. They need to, go into it very informed. As it happens, so I said I'm doing consulting and also research. One of my research projects is exactly on this gap. And you're trying to map the different kind of ways that you see kind of this decoupling between those intentions or the declarations of the organization and what is actually happening in practice. And, just, in a nutshell, what is really maybe most important, notice this gap, measure this gap from implementation. If you do care about the implementation, right? So measure what you treasure, right? Don't just stop at we're going to put a policy, but build in metrics for the level and quality of implementation, and think about it from the organizational perspective. Yes, it's a technological problem, but mostly it's an organizational problem, right? So don't forget about these aspects would be my advice.
Yeah, and I want to go to Noga and Hadassah, same question. And Noga, first with you, is there a business value in it? Is it profitable to be responsible? What is your experience in that? Maybe you can share from past, maybe regulations that you experience in data and cybersecurity, maybe, or cloud or others. Yeah.
Sure. So Ben, one of the ways I got buy-in for privacy early on in my career was by showing that our clients were asking questions. So for instance, we would get, people would send us proposals for an advertising campaign and they would have privacy questions. So we started keeping track of how many of those questions are we getting, what are people asking us, and we would take it back to our executives and let them know so that they could see the value in it. So again, when customers are asking questions, it's a great metric for us. And then competition, again, our competitors were putting out papers about GDPR, about differential privacy, all the steps that they were taking. So there was definitely competition there. And for the bigger organizations like Google, Microsoft, it's in their interest to push down those same responsible principles for two reasons. One, customers are going to go to the startups because they're going to have products that you don't have. because they're able to just go quickly, but there's more risk. So you want to make sure that others in the industry understand what you're doing and why, so you could help the startups have the same standards. And then two, you're protecting industry as a whole, right? So if one company gets into trouble, so social media companies getting into trouble in the past caused problems for ad tech in general. So the governments would regulate us, with more rules, because we had players in the industry that were doing things maybe that they shouldn't have, because again, they were in that startup phase and they didn't always understand and respect, the risk that was out there. Maybe they just didn't even know. So there's definitely like competitive, just business reasons why to do it. Those are just a couple I could think of.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all the words that you just said, Noga. We come at this topic from exactly the same perspective. It's really interesting to kind of see how a lot of organizations that we work with, well, for context is transparency, right? Transparency is key here. I think transparency towards your customers, transparency towards other stakeholders. And so what we see a lot of companies asking us is, great, we're working on a host of different ways of implementing, right? Bridging that gap that Ravit was just talking about between the principles that we've established and what we do in practice. And so an example that we have is an organization that asked us about that they have some sort of a system in place, some sort of a way of working around proxy variables, bias testing, and kind of detecting fraud. And so they wanted to share that opportunity with us and externally showcase how they've been working on that. And so rather than saying we're publishing our principles externally, it's like we have those principles, we have those frameworks in place. Now we actually want to show how we've done something in practice. Competition is a big point there, absolutely. Questions from customers is a big point there. Research that's being conducted on exactly this topic. And so I think all of those pieces kind of come together, but it is really important not just to go out with those theoretical frameworks, but I think really show kind of what those organizations are doing in practice and be comfortable to share that also. I think that that's still something that we at least see a lot of organizations try to kind of get over, maybe because they feel it's a very binary approach, right? We're either doing well or we're not. And if we go out with one thing, maybe we'll get questions about other things. But well, as we say, we do some assessments with organizations as well. I think that's part of it. We're not going to tell you whether you're doing perfect. We're going to just tell you what you're doing right and where you can improve.
Hadassah, the minute I see somebody say we're 100% compliant with GDPR, I'm like, okay, there's something wrong. And I would say the same with the EU AI. Like it's going to be the same thing. Like when you hear 100% compliance, it's not a good sign.
Yeah, on your page.
I agree. And maybe Giovanni, you can or Catalina, you can take us to, because one of the things I'm thinking right now when Noga and Ravit and Hadassah talked about organization responsibility, what are we missing? Because we can't put all our cards on or all our expectation from organization. We need to have something maybe from other institutions or from the public. What we need to address, and do you think we do it enough? Maybe a short comment on that.
I mean, that's a $1 million question.
I'm asking you big questions today, Giovanni.
No, I think that what actually has been said is important part of how we are looking at the problems, at the solutions. Let's say, even if it's difficult to talk about solutions, is to that each, since we were talking who is responsible for what, that each of the tile of this mosaic has a responsibility for obvious reason. This is quite naive to say, but of course, the problem is we need to understand which type of responsibility, because of course we know that if you think about users have a certain type of responsibility up to certain points, also, in terms of literacy as well, in terms of being citizens. That's another topic that we have been not talking about, to be fair. And that's another discussion. Of course, states, companies, the responsibility of companies, to be fair, whenever we talk about human rights, business and human rights, the responsibility of a company is always complicated to answer, because in the lack of a very, type of certain regulatory framework or style of obligations, certain company, could find profitable or interesting for its own purpose to follow certain types of rules or SCG, or call it like you want, whatever, the purpose you want to achieve. But that is not, of course, if a company wants to just raise money as they can and that is legal, what's the issue? At the end of the day, it's a private actor, it's just there for doing money, so for making money. So I don't understand what's the problem, if you think about from a very formalistic perspective, so when you look at the state, that is the most problematic thing, and that is also the most, it's where actually people actually profoundly disagree, to be fair, on the role of the state, because no one said that companies, should not make money, and at the same time that users should not be good citizens. I think that everyone agrees on that. I think, we profoundly disagree on the role of the state, not just to go back on that, but, we disagree because on the one hand, we see the state is always problematic when he wants actually to make, his foot on something that is quite problematic, like speech, for instance, that nowadays has preempted any type of regulatory attempt, especially in the US, to do whatever, even in consumer protection sometimes. But Catalina is there. But at the same time, for European standards, as you have always understood the role of the state, still, I mean, it's another conversation, So who is responsible for what, especially when it comes to the state? It's very hard to say, because is the state really responsible to protect, at the end, these fundamental rights? There is a positive obligation, technically speaking, also thinking about the Council of Europe, the European Court of Human Rights, to protect these fundamental rights. Should the state do something, regulate the space? So is there this type of obligation? Because I mean, if we move to the other side of the answer is no. Until now. Thanks.
We need to wrap up, but I think we can all agree that this discussion is just in the beginning, and I think before I wrap up, I want to do a speed light speed around to ask you, what is the trends or the thing that you look at 2025 and you hope that we're gonna accomplish as a society, as a community, in the area of responsible AI, or what do you wish we can accomplish, or you say that it's already we're doing that. So let's do a quick round and we'll wrap up with that. Maybe Catalina, if you want to start.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I would love to see us coming back as a global society to cooperative multi-stakeholderism, as opposed to a race to the top where, there's a competition of who's going to develop AI, who's going to become the new economic actor on the basis of that, because I think that that's going to be bad for everyone else. So we definitely need competition. I'm not saying that we don't, but it's important that we move into this direction together as the globe, basically, because these are borderless technologies.
I agree. Who do you pass the torch to?
Giovanni, let's go back the same way.
No, I will be very brief because I spoke too much, to be fair. I agree with Catalina, even of course, the reality of what we are seeing is increasingly polarized. Everyone is taking care about its own competition policy and whatever, as we know. But it's true. I mean, this is very also connected to the idea of creating like a CERN for AI. So like an international institution working together for science and understanding a little bit in computer science for AI. Would probably, I mean, this could be an option that we have already a president, so it could see the light of the day, but you never know. So I stop here also to, and moving also to Ravi, please.
Thank you. Okay, so the question is something we can hope to achieve in 2025. I would like to see the end of generative AI hype. I think it is achievable. I think we can do it. I think it's highly important for responsible AI.
Wow, that's a provocative statement.
Okay, maybe I'll just add one more sentence for explanation. I think a lot of people, this hype comes with this notion that this technology is somehow all-powerful, and any kind of problem it might have will magically resolve, such as bias or hallucinations, is just false. But the belief is harmful both for the users who are not bothering to check, and for companies who are also not bothering to check, or saying there's nothing that we should be doing because the foundation model companies are going to solve it. So yes, we can. I believe in us and Gen AI hype. Over to Hadassah.
Well, I'm gonna stay away from those those wishes, but I appreciate that a lot of it. Yeah, that's a really complicated question, Ben. I think there are so many things, and just like being in the United States, and having seen how the year has unpacked since the 20th of January, I think like my perspectives have changed somewhat. What I would say, and I think that applies, we were just talking about it, right? Adopting AI responsibly is a journey, and I think developing the frameworks and the guidance around that, from my perspective, right, working with those organizations will be the same. And so what I really hope is that we are able, and this has been mentioned by Catalina before as well, that we're able to take an approach that doesn't reinvent the wheel over and over again. There's so much noise out there. We have to sit around the table and take on, I like to think of it as a product mindset, ask the right questions, listen to the right people, listen to a broad range of people, and then very simply take action in a way that will actually be effective. And maybe that's very simplistic, but I do think bringing together the right minds will be really important. Over to you, Noga.
Yeah, Hadassah, I'm going to talk to that from a company perspective, in order for me to do my job, I need colleagues around me that understand AI and understand how it works, understand how they could use it. If they're not using it and they're not, if they're not understand, I have a lot of people who are scared of AI. And so either we're going to get left in the dust, or I'm not going to have colleagues around me that can help me with AI governance. So that to me, the upskilling, just helping people learn new skills is really important. AI literacy, for instance.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you all for this insightful discussion. Really appreciate your time. And as I said, it's we need a full week seminar to touch all of these topics, maybe more than a week to touch all of this. And I hope we'll meet again and discuss this soon. Thank you again. And with that, I'll move to our industry track. And I'll happy to introduce Kirill Troskovsky. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you so much, Ben. That was a great panel. Great. So yeah, we hour and a half, so I'll be short and give as much time as possible to industry track. Small reminder: in industry track, we showcase leading AI companies who use AI responsible. And today, I'm super happy to welcome our first guest in industry track, John Famvan, who is founder at OpenLab. So John, floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl. I just sent you a screen share request.
Yep, now we should be able to do it.
I'll just keep talking while going. Yeah, thank you so much, Ben and Kirill, for having me. My name is John. I founded a company called Open Laws. We're a public benefit company. And I think what I want to talk about today dovetails pretty nicely into what we've been talking about with Joshua, and really glad to actually come after a panel talking a lot about governance and regulatory compliance. There is a lot of mysticism around AI, and I really want to talk about being able to ground it in legal data and just really the necessity of that. And so, why even bother grounding in data at all? State of the art models seem so capable today, and they're starting to show ability to reason, and they even use internet search results because everything that we read on the internet must be true. And obviously we talked about hallucinations. That's not really, I don't think I need to talk about that with this audience, but I think we do need to talk about the data that we're training on, right? And so if we look at kind of the latest models that have come out recently, OpenAI released, O1 was released in December 2024, 7 months after the last 4.0 model. Claude is pretty transparent. It actually tells you that it was trained on data up to April of 2024, and Llama 6 months between the two versions. This means there's a gap in that training data. It means that we don't necessarily know when the data you're looking at. And so when you're looking at a model and you're using it to answer legal questions or compliance questions or medical questions, you don't know how old the data is. It could be really, really old. And so we're putting a lot of trust in these foundational model makers. So, they're collecting the data themselves, or paying contractors, they're licensing data. But how much do we really trust, Common Crawl? And so if you think about emergency COVID regulations, for example, those are being repealed. Are those in the data set? Are they not in the data set? We don't necessarily know. We can't test every corner case, right? And so obviously for legal, regulatory compliance and medical professionals, the need for correctness is extremely high, right? So Joshua said in his keynote, people are going to die if we mess up here. So attorneys are trusted to give good counsel. The cost of non-compliance, as what we heard from the last panel, is very, very high for companies. We don't want to make mistakes. And building our own models is not necessarily a business feasible thing to do. But in particular, why do we want to ground in verifiable legal data? And I think I wish Joshua was still around because I think he would have some words here. But the timing in legal matters is part of the correctness, right? If we're asking the question about what are the things that I should do on a Tokyo vacation, those don't really change day to day. And on top of that, no one's going to die if you go to, a location that was less interesting. So using a COVID example again, if you ask in 2021, is it permissible for an ambulance company to bill Medicare for transportation to an urgent care center? That was allowable during COVID, but not in 2024, right? So what was the law at the time of that legal matter does really, really matter when it comes to legal questions. Another example, and Joshua touched upon this, is that we really need to be able to understand the domain and how to apply the law. And so jurisdictions, for example, matter a lot. What city, what state, what court has jurisdiction over a particular legal matter? And so we can't just ask a general question, what's the dog leash law? That's not broad, that's not specific enough. We need to know what jurisdiction. So that's also a very different type of thing when we're asking about legal questions and why we actually need legal data that can back that up and that is specific enough and contextual enough. And so the last panel talked a lot about contextual and the importance of that context. And so that's true here as well. Right, so all these things sound really, really reasonable, right? But why am I even talking about this? Why isn't everyone doing this? I think it's obvious. It's hard, but I want to dive into deeper, right? So why is it hard? Can't we just scrape all the law websites, embed it, put it into a RAG pipeline, and then we're done, right? If only it was that simple. So the US legal system is a bit weird, right? We have our federalist system, meaning we have all our 50 states plus Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, but essentially the law is scattered, right? And based on our state budgets, there aren't very many efforts to modernize or digitize both the law, the codified law, or the case law. The laws in this country are always going to be decentralized. The second thing is law changes over time. It's the fancy word in engineering is bitemporal, right? Laws have start and end dates. The laws that you see online today are just a snapshot in time, but laws change. They get repealed, they get amended, they get sunsetted, they even get moved sometime to a different part of the law. And so this kind of starts to come back to my next point, which is, and I think Joshua would agree here, is that using law data requires domain knowledge. And simultaneously, it also requires technical knowledge, right? How does an API work? How do I determine good law from bad law? What happens when a case gets overturned? What happens when a law gets repealed? And then the final, probably most important thing is that there's only 2 publishers of law in the United States. There's 2 other companies that have this data, but essentially all of them are building their own API products, their own AI products. And even though this is public domain data, there's terms and conditions and there's a bunch of technical reasons I don't want to get into, but essentially you can't get this data. So anyone trying to innovate in this space, anyone trying to create more reliable AI, this is a difficult challenge. They can't do it because they don't have the data. And so this is the industry track. And so here's the plug. We've at Open Laws have built a legal data API. We initially created it for human beings. I think it's an important point to make too, is that law itself was written for human beings. There are words on a page meant for human beings to interpret. They weren't necessarily meant for machines. And so when we started collecting this data about 5 years ago, we understood that the way you interact with the law is different from just words. They're not just tokens. We discovered that along the way. We need to be able to identify good law. We need to be able to identify relevant law. And so we understood that structured data was much more important than just having just words. All right. And so we preserve the hierarchy of the data, we preserve indentations, formatting, bullet points. Titles of laws have chapters of law, have sections of law, and each of those have bullet points. You might have Roman numeral A, which is nested by bullet point number 1. And so that's important, that those hints are there for a reason. And then being able to track repeals, right? Repealed law is no longer good law. You can't provide good advice. You can't run a company if you're operating on old repealed laws. And then finally, future laws too, right? We see laws that become effective on January 1st. And last 2 slides, OpenLaws has created a data set across all 53 jurisdictions, including statutes, including regulations. For federal law, we've started collecting case law with our partners at Court Listener and Harvard Case Law Access Project. And we're updating it monthly for the most important law. And don't know if this is relevant to most people here, but presidential executive orders have been updating really frequently. So we've actually created a data feed for that updates daily. But I'd love to talk to you more about your legal data needs, and I'm happy to share our domain expertise. So please send me an email if you're interested. Take a picture of this QR code. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'll turn it back to Kirill.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. I think we're running out of time for questions. Please share links in the chat so people can access them. I think we will also distribute them in follow-up emails after. But this is amazing and great. Really excited about an API. Yeah, and all questions, chats, and Q&A is always available for you to follow up. Cool. So I will want to pass it back to Ben to introduce, or to Jerry, sorry, to introduce our last keynote speaker. Jerry, please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So, hi everybody, I'm Jerry Spanakis. I'm an assistant professor in Maastricht University. Also helped a bit with the organization of this workshop. So, we're running a bit late on the schedule, so we'll take a bit more time for the next keynote. As far as I know, also Arvind needs to leave early, so we'll try to keep the time intact. But for now, it is my extreme honor and pleasure to introduce our last keynote. So Arvind Narayanan, he's a professor of computer science at Princeton University and the director of the Center for Information Technology Policy. I assume for everybody in this call, you don't need proper introduction, but I think, the latest book you co-authored, Arvind co-authored, is the AI Snake Oil, which has been read by more than 50,000 stakeholders in the AI. And also before has written books on the fairness in machine learning. I'm personally a big fan of the Dark Patterns project, and that's how I got to know this work. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Arvind. I think you have around 15 minutes and then maybe short time for Q&A, and then we'll be able to finish on time. So without further ado, the floor is yours. I think everybody is looking forward.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I hope people can see my slides. So I would love to talk about the medium to long-term future of AI and how we can prepare for that, how we can steer it, how we can adapt to it. Now, really everyone has opinions about what the future of AI is going to look like, but of course no one can predict the future, so why should we listen to anyone on this topic? I think when we dig into the details of why people differ so much about what the future of AI is going to look like, it turns out that those differences in predictions are often rooted in disagreements about how they interpret the present state of AI. So I think that's a key thing. I think that for someone to have credibility in offering suggestions for the future, they should be able to summarize the present state of AI in a way that makes sense to you, is credible to you. Otherwise, what it means is that they're operating from a set of assumptions that are very different from yours and therefore are going to come up with recommendations that might not make sense to you. So that's what I want to start by doing. I want to start by pointing out a paradox, the level of divergence in terms of how people currently interpret the state of AI. And I wanted to try to tell you how I think we can reconcile that. And if that sounds convincing to you, I think that'll be a good baseline on which to build how we can think about the future of AI progress and what that'll mean for the impacts of AI. And so here's the paradox. When we look at people in tech, an increasing fraction of them believe that human-like AI, some people call it artificial general intelligence, it doesn't matter, there are various terms that mean roughly the same thing, is either already here or imminent. We're talking, a time frame of months. And this is a very sincerely held belief. Of course, some of them have interests in hyping up their products, but the majority of people do seem to hold this belief sincerely. And yet, at the same time, I want to claim that outside of various AI bubbles, AI use seems to be approximately zero. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a second. It might seem surprising. I will show you evidence of this on the next slide. Generative AI use. And the way I interpret this is that everyday people are saying, through their non-use of AI, that, look, we hear all the hype, we've looked at this, but it's not that useful to us, so we're not using it. And so who's right? I think not both of these perspectives can be right at the same time. And I want to argue that we can reconcile these two. There is a kind of middle ground, and then I'll go from there. Okay, so first let me give you evidence of this. There was a paper that said that generative AI is being rapidly adopted, and this is the screenshot of the first page, and it said about 40% of US adults are already using generative AI. This was a few months ago. However, if you dig into the details, it turns out that this includes even someone who might have used ChatGPT once in the last week to get a limerick or something like that. In terms of how people are productively using it, it's a much smaller amount than you might think from that headline. It's only 0.5% to somewhere 3.5% of work hours. Right, and the paper argues that generative AI adoption has been much more rapid than the adoption of the PC back when it was introduced in 1977. However, again, that's only if you ignore this matter of the intensity of adoption. Based on some extrapolations, I think that if you consider this fact, how little most people are using generative AI, you could argue that generative AI adoption is up to an order of magnitude slower than PC adoption was in the first 2 to 3 years after the release of the PC. So that's what I mean by outside AI bubbles. People are not yet really using this technology. And if you ask people in the tech world, they'll just say, oh, this is because, people have no idea what AI capabilities are. And they're just behind the curve. And they'll say that lawyers, for instance, just feel threatened by AI and therefore are not using AI. And you hear these views all the time. And that might seem ridiculous to those of you who are out there in the trenches of legal AI, but this is a very genuinely held view among so many people in the tech industry. So what is the basis of those views? A lot of these very optimistic assessments of AI capabilities are coming from measuring the benchmark performance of AI models. So when GPT-4 came out, there was a lot of hype about the fact that it can pass the bar exam. And more recently, you have graphs like this. This was from the International AI Safety Report that was released just a few days ago. And you can see here on various exams, including PhD level exams, recently the progress has been looking basically vertical. And this is true, I have no dispute with this chart. But I want to talk about what this actually means. Right, and so this is it's on the basis of this that many people are concluding that AI is as good as a PhD on almost any subject. However, I think this goes back to a very old fallacy in AI. More than 60 years ago, AI pioneers started focusing on teaching AI to play chess. And that was for two reasons. They thought chess is very hard for people, it must be hard for AI. And if AI is good at chess, that would be very easy to measure. Those were the two reasons why they picked chess, and it turned out that AI being good at chess didn't translate to other domains. Unfortunately, I think people who are benchmarking AI are committing the same fallacy now. These exam-based benchmarks are very much the same. Because they're so easy to objectively measure performance, they also turn out to be the kinds of skills on which AI is very good, but those skills don't translate to various kinds of real-world tasks that we might want AI to perform. So my team here builds better AI evaluation methods. We call it the science of AI agent evaluation. It's the SAGE group. So if you look for that, you'll see a lot of our papers showing the weaknesses of current benchmarks. I don't want to go into those details, but I do think this broad view that human-like AI is here is based on a very flimsy kind of evidence and is broadly wrong. And I do think there is something we can take from the fact that people are not using AI nearly as much as one might think they would. However, I don't think that's the end of the story. I think both sides are missing something here. I do think there are ways in which AI capability in relatively narrow domains has been progressing dramatically, but is not widely recognized by people. So I do think there are two sides to the story. I want to give you just a couple of such examples. There are many of them. And based on my assessment, again, this is not based on any formal evidence I can point to, but just based on talking to people. Most people are not at all aware that these are things you can do today. So you can use, for instance, generative AI as a thinking partner. And what I mean by that is, while that PhD level performance on exams might not translate to AI, being able to make scientific discoveries, for instance, right? In the process of my own scientific research, I find it extremely useful to kind of share my thoughts with these AI models, if you will, ask for critical feedback, try to consider different viewpoints on the same question. And so when I'm doing research, I'm using AI every few minutes, and it's been a very significant change in the way I do things. And I do think this idea of a thinking partner is relevant to many, many different kinds of knowledge work, if you will, perhaps including in the legal area. But this is the kind of thing that's hard to measure with benchmarks, right? Because it's fundamentally about human AI interaction. So you don't have any headlines about this because there are no benchmarks on which AI is crushing this. And so people generally are not aware. It takes at least a few hours of work to figure out how to use it productively in this way. And single-use apps, this is another very interesting one. I'm going to give you a fun application of this, but there are also more productivity-oriented applications. When I'm spending time with my kids, I often find it very nice to be able to ask AI to build me an app on the spot in like 30 seconds in order to teach them something. And again, I've been doing this for over a year now with AI, and it's incredible to me that this is possible at all. Here's a simple example of this. I just asked ChatGPT to build me an app that generates random sentences and generates images to illustrate those sentences and can read the sentence out to the child. And you click a button and you get a different sentence and a different image, and it won't show the image until the child actually reads the sentence. So this is a very nice way to teach my kid phonics and reading. And I build lots of apps for teaching them math and so on and so forth. And it's it's made a difference to the way we interact, and it's really fun. And it's not the kind of thing you could have imagined doing a couple of years ago. So there are specific ways in which AI capability is changing dramatically. And people have not explored these tools enough to know that these are things they can do for themselves to make their own lives or their workflows better. So I do think there's a gap in both directions. Awareness of AI limitations is also low. Every week I see these news stories about lawyers who submit briefs filled with hallucinated citations and get into trouble for it. And I predict that this gap might actually increase over time because chatbots, the simple interface is very easy to use, but even there are a lot of pitfalls like hallucinations and bias, which we've been hearing about. However, as these capabilities increase, as you get to these agentic systems, as you get to these reasoning models, the expertise required to get use out of them and avoid these pitfalls keeps increasing over time, and therefore I think this is going to become a big issue. Okay, so that's the big picture. AI capabilities are advancing, but not in the way that technologists are claiming. It's not really, a replacement for people's work in the economy. It is, I think, relevant to the vast majority of knowledge workers. And in many cases, these are capabilities that people are, for the most part, not familiar with. So what is this going to look like in the future? I do think there is going to be a very long road from capability improvements all the way to how this is going to have an impact on the world and on the economy. Capability, I do think, is going to continue increasing. However, the big question I think that I don't know the answer to is right now we have what is called a jagged frontier. AI capabilities are really strong in some domains, far better than people. Chess playing is a trivial example, but you can think of other ones. But in some cases, AI struggles with things that a toddler can do. Is this going to get smoothed out, or is the jaggedness going to further increase? And depending on this, the implications might be quite different. And something we've written about, and I'll give you citations at the end of this talk, is that translating capability to products is a big step, and companies have kind of dropped the ball on that. So to translate capability to products, they need to work on cost, reliability, and all of these factors, including the user experience that I have listed here. And we give examples in our essays of how that has gone wrong and is slowly changing. But even if they build products that are useful to people, I think for people to actually use those products will require a lot of experimentation to identify use cases and learn to avoid pitfalls, the kinds of things we've been talking about. And the last step, and this is the step that is least often recognized, is that adapting to these new capabilities, new products, new use cases is going to require tons of organizational changes at companies. And it might even require changes to our laws and social norms. To figure out liability, for instance, when AI makes mistakes, sometimes you might say, okay, we should just simply not use AI for that if it's going to hallucinate. Sometimes we might say, it's so useful for this application that we want to use it despite hallucinations. And now you have to figure out liability, right? Until laws and norms change to figure out who to blame in certain situations, it's not going to be adopted that much. So here's an example of organizational changes. This is from software. AI is really good at coding, but not at software engineering. Coding is a subset of software engineering. Software engineering requires, all of the organizational things that need to go into maintaining, testing, and developing, let's say, a 1,000,000-line code base, right? And so if AI has these asymmetric capabilities, does it make sense to reorganize software engineering so that there is a much greater focus on what is called microservices? These are very small, tiny programs that do one thing, do them well, and AI is good at writing these programs, and all those programs talk to each other, as opposed to these kind of monolithic software frameworks that we have now. So far, software engineering has mostly operated on the monolithic framework. But if it were to change to a microservices framework, maybe that would be a much better way to take advantage of AI. But that kind of change, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens over a period of decades, really fundamentally changing the way we do software engineering. So I think these are the reasons why people keep making these over-optimistic predictions about dramatic changes coming in like a 2-year time frame, whereas we really should be thinking about decades for these kinds of changes. And by the way, there's a nice literature on this. These are often called the 3 steps: invention, innovation, and diffusion, that go into the development and adoption of new products in the market. Diffusion here combines these last 2 buckets. Okay, some last thoughts I wanted to offer you, and then maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions. If this happens, if at some point we have advanced AI that is capable of doing most of the cognitive tasks that we consider valuable in today's economy, what will that world look like? Whenever that happens, maybe never, maybe a couple decades out. I don't think it's going to happen in 2 years. So I think we can take some lessons from this, from past technologies that will apply to this. We can take some lessons from the internet. If you went back 20 or 30 years and told people, look, this new communication medium is one day going to intermediate almost any kind of cognitive work that we do, people would have laughed at you. People did laugh at those predictions, and yet those predictions came true. And the surprising thing is, to me at least, that it didn't radically change the economy. So it is true that today you don't have to go to a library to look up a fact. You can look it up online. This is the sort of thing that a couple decades ago you would have thought is going to give you a 100x improvement in productivity. But what happened was, when you remove certain bottlenecks from your workflows, other things become the bottlenecks. And so it hasn't had a dramatic economic impact, I would say. In fact, there is that famous quotation: the computer revolution shows up everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Right. So on the one hand, it is true that certain radical predictions came true, but on the other hand, it's true that the skeptics were also right and that this didn't change the world. And so perhaps we can expect similar with AI. Last thought, we can also take lessons from the Industrial Revolution. That was a time, unlike the internet, when the nature of work did radically change. Before the Industrial Revolution, most labor was manual. And in fact, things that were not manual labor, people wouldn't have considered it work at all. It's crazy. They would have thought that, you can just talk to people and that would be considered work, for instance. And so the Industrial Revolution changed that, right? We were able to automate most manual tasks. And so perhaps AI will do that for most cognitive tasks. But even if that happens, like the Industrial Revolution, it does not in any way mean the end of work. My prediction is that if it comes to pass that AI can automate most cognitive tasks, most of what people will do, most of what we consider work, will be what we now consider to be in the realm of AI control and safety. In other words, even if AI is very capable, we will not feel comfortable putting it out there without any supervision in all kinds of consequential scenarios. And therefore, a lot of what we're going to be doing is operating AI, just like you need people today to operate powerful machinery. And a lot of the decision making that happens today has a normative component, and so a lot of that we won't be comfortable delegating to AI. So the tasks that people will do will focus on those kinds of things. So that's a very brief prediction for how to think about what is the current state of AI, how might this change in the future, on what time frame, and if it does change, what will that world look like. Again, this was very brief, but we've written a lot on this. Here are some references. And if we have time, I'm happy to take 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arvind, for this great talk. I think, yeah, we have some time, short time for some questions. I'll try to synthesize a bit also what was posted on the chat. Maybe my first question has to do with the fact that you mentioned, and maybe correctly, that of course outside our bubble, wherever you are an academic or a developer, the adoption of AI is practically zero. But at the same time, you did mention that we are using it maybe subconsciously on some thinking, partner tasks, and so on. So my question is that, do you maybe think that, of course, the narrative of the big tech that, yeah, AGI is coming is, just overhyped, and in the end, that does more harm than good, in the sense that we should focus on perfecting AI, as you said, in the capabilities that it is already working well, right? So as an assistive technology, I'm curious about your thoughts.
Exactly. I do think the hype about AGI is harmful. And to clarify, when I said, some people are using it as a thinking partner, those people I think are in the bubble, so to speak. I'm in the bubble, right? And when I talk to people who haven't spent a lot of time exploring AI capabilities, they're generally not aware that you can use it as a thinking partner. And those are things that we can change, right? So instead of hyping up AGI or replacing everybody, we can teach people how to productively use it as a thinking partner, as an assistive technology to improve their own creativity instead of replacing what they do. And yeah, so the goal of my talk was to focus more attention on those types of things.
Great. And my next question, and then I think we can wrap this up, is also related to something that Santos put on chat. Is like also related to your book, right? Your AI snake oil, and related to your previous work on fair machine learning. And in the end, right, with the current direction we see on developing larger and larger models, do you think that maybe if you had to choose, right, shall we focus on the current direction, which is like maybe a dead end, of course, with explaining deep models and deep LLMs? Or do you see also some maybe light in the sense of the regulation and systemic oversight? So what I want to say is that, do you think that technical transparency is still doable, or shall we focus on the regulation? I know it's a tough question, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, why not both, right? So from the technical perspective, the field of mechanistic interpretability has certainly come a long way. And I think it has helped show that this idea that large language models are black boxes is only because we never bothered to build those interpretability techniques, but we can build those interpretability techniques, right? If we spent 50% of our effort building LLMs and 50% on interpretability, the scenario would look very, very different. But that's never going to be enough. We can't just let companies build those technologies to the extent that they see fit. We certainly need regulation, and the regulation doesn't have to focus on the internals of models, right? What we care about from a regulatory perspective in terms of guardrails has much more to do with the input-output behavior of the model, how it's going to behave in various real-world contexts, and we can have transparency and guarantees and all those things without ever looking inside the black box of models. So we need that too, but we also need interpretability.
Great. And I think on this positive note, thank you again for this very inspiring talk. I think we're very curious to follow your work also in the future. And thank you for joining us. And I think now I'm gonna pass it back to Ben, who I hope took a breath, and he can do the wrap-up of the workshop.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Arvind. It was a fascinating discussion, and we have a lot of questions, and I'm sure we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you very much. Wow, what a conversation, what a day, what a workshop. Thank you everyone for joining today. It's been an incredible discussion. I know it might feel like we just scratched the surface of so many topics in responsible AI, but I really hope that it sparked some thoughts on whether we're truly steering AI in the right direction and what we need to do to ensure we all benefit from this powerful technology, maybe too hype technology, but very powerful. A special shout out to the amazing speakers and panelists for sharing their insights and expertise. This was such a valuable and thought-provoking session. Thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, ReAI Labs isn't just about events like this. We're also diving into more research and building tools. You can reach out in any media that you want. We have a website. We can share it here in the chat as well. And of course, a massive thank to my fellow organizers. You saw Kirill and Jerry, but there are more in the background, Royal, Santosh, and Rohit. You guys rock. Thank you so much. This would have happened without you. You might see a feedback form soon. Would love to hear your thoughts so we can make the next event even better. Speaking of which, we're already brainstorming of our next event. So if you have ideas of topics or want to collaborate, send them our way. That's it. I hope you found this session is inspiring as I did. And thanks again and have a great rest of your day.